So first, I want to thank JDRF for doing this webinar. I was just saying to Ruth earlier that, as she said, my daughter was diagnosed when she was 4, and this was always the most stressful week of the year for me and our family. So I really appreciate JDRF doing this for the community. It's wonderful. And I also want to mention that I cannot see the chat, so I'm really happy that Ruth's going to be coordinating that, and we'll try to get to all of your questions and comments at the end. So what I hope to do is give you some ideas on preparing for sending your child back to school, help you navigate some resources that will help you do that preparation, talk about some of the common problems that we have in sending our kids with type 1 to school and how you might be able to solve those. And of course, you know,
you just got muted, Elizabeth. Sorry, for some reason. Sorry. Yeah, if you could just repeat your last line.
There. For some reason, I can see that my mute keeps going on even though I'm not doing anything, so I'm not sure what that's about. Okay, but I'll keep an eye on it. I want to encourage everyone to share their, not just their questions, but their experiences and tips, because as I go through this, you're probably thinking, you know, if you have any experience with sending your child to school with type 1, you have other ways and maybe have other solutions that others can benefit from. This session is going to be most appropriate if your child is a bit younger, if you're going to school for the first time, and if school is generally a new situation. But again, if you do have more experience, then you probably have some great advice that you can share with others. So as I mentioned, this is why I'm here. This is my daughter, who was diagnosed a few months before she was to start senior kindergarten here in Ottawa. And it was an extremely stressful time. She was we started on 2 injections a day, NPH. We didn't have much support at school. We didn't have a pump for many years, so we were really old school. And it was just a very, very stressful time getting ready for school. And I like to use this image because I think it's just really shows what we're dealing with. So we have a disability. Diabetes is type 1 diabetes is classified as a disability, but our kids, for all intents and purposes, look just like all the other kids in school. So, you know, they have this very serious medical condition, but, you know, on the surface, one might never know it. So when it comes to diabetes at school, we really want to strike a balance. So we need for our kids to be supported. We need vigilance when it comes to keeping them safe in school. And we need people at school to have a good understanding of type 1 diabetes and all that it means to kids and their experience at school. But at the same time, it's really important for our kids to fit in. Right? Kids don't want to stand out when they're young. We don't want them to be stigmatized, and we want them to be able to do what all their classmates are doing. So we want them to be kids first and a child with diabetes second. So that's something that we're trying to balance all the time. So as Ruth mentioned, I'm representing Diabetes at School, which is a national initiative. It's a collaboration of the Canadian Pediatric Society, which is where I work, the Canadian Pediatric Endocrine Group, and Diabetes Canada. So I say that so that you know where the information that I'm about to give is coming from. It's coming from a group of very credible organizations, of experts in pediatric diabetes, and also from a group of people who have the best interests of kids first. So again, everything that I'm going to show you and everything that is on the Diabetes at School website comes from expert recommendations, primarily from the Canadian Pediatric Society and Canadian Pediatric Endocrine Group's position statement on diabetes at school, and Diabetes Canada's guidelines for caring for kids at school. These guidelines were produced around 2014, and if you're interested in, you know, the evidence behind everything that we've done on diabetes at school, this is where you're going to find them. But these guidelines are aimed not just at parents, but also at professionals, in addition to folks working in school. But everything you see that comes forward is based on these guidelines. So when it comes to managing diabetes at school, there are really three things that we must have that we want to focus on. So one is insulin administration. We need to make sure that our kids are getting the right amount of insulin all day long. We want to focus on blood sugar monitoring, because blood sugar monitoring obviously is, cornerstone to diabetes management. And thirdly, we want to focus on emergency management. So what happens when, when there's a mild low, moderate low, and hopefully how can we prevent severe lows from happening? So those are the three major things. And how do we do that? Well, we want first, and I'm going to talk a little more in detail about these different things. An individual care plan is going to be key so that everybody knows what needs to happen in different situations. We need support, right? We need support in the school community, depending on the age and stage and developmental abilities of your child. They're going to need support with various aspects of management. Even older kids are going to need support. So we need those champions in the school to help our kids. We need to make sure that they can do what they need to do to manage their diabetes anywhere at any time. And checking blood sugar is key to that. And of course, eating when it comes to preventing lows or treating lows. For little kids, you might need supervision for meals and snacks, and we need appropriate time and space to make sure that they can eat what they need to. We need all staff to be trained to recognize and treat low blood sugar, not just the staff who are in the classroom with your child. There was a case in Kingston a number of years ago where a girl was on her way to the office to treat a low, not a great idea. And she became, I think, disoriented, and someone else saw her, knew what was happening, and was able to prevent a very serious situation. So at minimum, all staff need to be trained to know the symptoms of low blood sugar and how to treat it. And for older kids, we might need accommodations for tests and exams, depending on where their blood sugar is. And if they have a low during a test or an exam, they're going to need appropriate time to stop, to treat, to recover, and then to get on with the test. When it comes to emergency management, we want to make sure that glucagon is available. This used to be more complicated when glucagon was only available as an injection, but now that it's available in a nasal format, which has no needle and is pretty easy to use, we want to make sure that that's available at all times and that folks in the school know how to use it. So as parents or caregivers, what are our responsibilities? Because of course, it's not just about the school. It's really about creating a relationship. You really want to create a relationship with the people in your child's school. And so you might find that you have more involvement that you might otherwise have, which can be a really good thing. But there's a few things that you want to make sure that you do. So you want to have really good communication. You will be meeting with your child's principal, with teachers and other staff. And you want to think about that communication, sort of how does it go? You want to think about your and your child's needs, but also about their needs. And maybe the first week of school isn't going to be the best time for a meeting because they've got a whole lot of things going on. Can you do that the week before school? Think about what's going on with them and what their communication needs are. And this is going to be an ongoing piece of work that you need to do as a parent. And, as you build the relationships, it will get easier. The care plan, it's our responsibility to initiate the care plan, although you'll find in some areas where there are policies in place. The school may contact you to fill out certain forms if they have a template. If that's the case, sometimes that happens once the school year is already underway, and that's a bit late. You really need the care plan to be ready to go and reviewed with everyone on day one. So if your school or school board does not have a template, we have a pretty good one on diabetes at school, and I'll show you the various elements of that in a couple of slides. You're probably going to be doing much or most or all of the training. It's the needs are such that, you know, they can't be done by clinics. So you're probably going to be doing a lot of it. Always encourage folks to think about, you know, who it is you're training, what they need to know, and how much time you should expect them to devote to that training. So not everyone in the school needs to know everything about diabetes. As much as we would love them to, and that would be the ideal, they don't necessarily need to. So think about the role that this particular person plays with your child and what kinds of things they'll need to know. So the classroom teacher will need to know different things than the gym teacher or the bus driver, let's say. And again, I'll get into that in more detail in a little bit. And of course, we're responsible for supplies, you know, making sure that there's enough, making sure that things have not expired, and that you have some, again, back to the communication, you have a way of the school letting you know that things are, you know, are maybe running low if your child's not old enough to let you know about that. So there are a lot of things that can affect, you know, how things go in school. And, you know, not the least of which is how independent your child is. And some of those factors that go into that independence will be, you know, how long has it been since they're diagnosed? A child who's just recently diagnosed is, you know, going to have different abilities than one who's been living with diabetes for a number of years. Of course, their age. Little kids in kindergarten have different abilities than a child in grade 6. Their developmental stage. Not all kids who are, you know, in grade 3 have the same developmental abilities, so that's a consideration. Your child's insulin regimen, of course, plays a big role. As I mentioned, you know, we were what is now, I think, considered old school. We were on NPH so that my daughter didn't need an injection at lunchtime. But you want to be sure that that insulin regimen is matching your child's needs and not the needs of the school. So technology, of course, many of you hopefully have access to CGM and or a pump. That's a very different experience than, you know, doing injections, being on MDI and not having CGM. So those things will make a difference. The school is going to make a difference if they already have children with type 1 or they have recently had kids with type 1. That makes them, you know, differently able to handle, you know, to support your child. But make sure that just because they've had kids with type 1 before, you know, if it was a number of years ago, perhaps they don't have experience with technology. Perhaps they weren't doing things in the best way that they could be doing. So always make sure that you are giving them information that they need that is specific to your child. And then, of course, your own situation is going to affect how things go with school. Some people have, you know, a lot more flexibility when it comes to going to school or being at school or being available, you know, whenever the school needs them. So, you know, there's a lot of variability there. This is a video that we produced a few years ago, well, 2018, you can see. I'm not going to play it, but I would encourage you to have a look at this one. You can find it on YouTube. Just Google, well, it's under the Canadian Pediatric Society's account. And it's a good one to show to school staff, especially if there's any kind of resistance to supporting your child. It approaches type 1 at school from a rights framework. So it essentially says that kids, all kids, including kids with type 1, have the right to be safe, supported, and included at school. And those are pretty fundamental values when it comes to all students. So I think it's something that teachers and school staff can relate to. So it sets out the why, if you will, why we need to do these certain things, because our kids need to be safe, supported, and included when they go to school. We did this little checklist, if this is helpful for some people, if you want sort of hear the kind of steps that we need to take before starting school. So I'll run through this quickly. Of course, you want to contact the school when your child is diagnosed or before starting school. start with the principal because they are essentially the CEO of that school. And then you will want to meet with the principal and your child's classroom teacher or teachers. And if you can, and if it's a different teacher, the phys ed teacher as well. Those would be kind of the minimum folks that you'd want to meet with. If you can meet with them before school starts, I find they're a lot more relaxed. They have more time. That first week of school is rough and crazy for everyone. So that's not a good time. So if you can meet with them before school starts, that's going to be ideal. It's really helpful to find your school board's policy on type 1. And if you can't find one, start with your province. Here in Ontario, which is what I know best, the Ontario Ministry of Education has a policy that says that all school boards need to have a policy on type 1. So you need to look for your school board's policy, and that will show you what the expectations are of the school. And then it would also, if there were any specific forms, they would probably be attached to that policy. So again, as I mentioned before, you're going to want to complete that individual care plan as best you can. Use the one that your board has if that's what they require. If not, use the one we have on diabetes at school. You're going to want to set up your training. So get your materials together. We have lots on diabetes at school. So, one of the reasons we produced all of this stuff is so that you could focus on your child, that you didn't have to, reinvent the wheel and develop all kinds of training on what is type 1 and how do you check blood sugar and all of this stuff. So we have all kinds of resources on the site, text-based documents, we have videos, and we also have a self-directed learning module that teachers and school staff can do. And I'll show you that a bit later. So you want to get your training together. Make sure you get your supplies together, all the things that you're going to need to send to school with your child. That would include your emergency kits that are going to go in different areas of the school. You're going to want to make sure that you have a communication system with the school, and that's something that you can talk about in that first meeting that you have with them. So are you going to communicate by text? Are you going to communicate by phone? How often? And, under what circumstances? So are you expecting a text or call when the blood sugar goes below a certain level, that type of thing? And that's going to be different for everyone. There's no right or wrong. It's what's good for your child and your family. And all of this information is going to be documented in the individual care plan. And well, I'll get to the individual care plan in a second. Remember this is a lot to do, but if you can involve your child and make it kind of fun and special, that can help. When my daughter was little, I always used to, make sure I had that the emergency kits were fun boxes, that they looked kind of cute and they looked kind of fun, and they can help choose the low treatments that they want to be in there, or the carb snacks that they want to include in there. You can have them put stickers on it, but try to make it a little bit fun so that it's not, that's not a big chore for you. You might need to think about other adults in your child's school day. A lot of kids take the bus, a lot of kids go to before and after school programs. So as I said earlier, think specifically about what those folks need to know, so that you can zero in on the information that you need to give them. And then do plan to check in and see how it's going. I'm sure you've already thought about that, but what we want in theory is not necessarily what's going to happen in practice. So, check in after the first week of school, and then, be prepared to adjust plans as needed. So I've talked about the individual care plan. This is the sort of cover page of the one that we have on diabetes at school. It is designed to cover everything that applies to your child. So it's quite long. We've had people say, oh my gosh, it's so long, but you won't necessarily need every single section. What we've tried to do is include space for every situation, whether a child is on injections or a pump or CGM, a blood sugar meter, but depending on your child's regimen, you won't need all the sections. So you can just leave them out, cross them off. There's a Word version of this template on our site. You can remove the things that you don't want, but it's designed to sort of walk you through so that you can think about everything. And then if it doesn't apply to you, then just, strike it off. But the important pieces in there are going to be when and how often they check blood sugar at school, how to treat lows, what to do when they're high, how, when, and how much insulin we give, meals and snacks, activity, so phys ed classes, recesses, and then any other aspects of a student's diabetes care at school. So there are some things that might not be in the plan that you want to think about as well. So you've probably thought about this already, which is, well, how am I going to, take care of snacks and lunches? How am I going to, pre-count the carbs and things like that? So that's going to vary from individual to individual. Parents are super good sources of creative ideas about this. And, if you're in one of the Facebook groups, there are lots of opportunities to share and get ideas from other parents. Field trips may not be included in the plan, so that's something to think about as well. Handling special events with food. Again, thinking about the whole idea of inclusion and communicating that. I always like to communicate that to school staff at the beginning of the year to say, if we have good communication, if you can give me a heads up when there's something coming up with food so we can plan how to make sure my child is included. Now, if your child is on MDI or, on pump and they're fairly independent, then this won't be a huge issue, but in other situations, it might be more complicated. But for myself as a parent, I always wanted to make sure that my daughter was included. I didn't want a teacher making a decision that something needed to be set aside and she couldn't participate. So it goes back to the communication and knowing things in advance so that you can take the steps to plan for it and make sure that your child can participate. You're going to want to think about when the activity routine changes. I know when my daughter was in elementary school, sometimes the schedule at the beginning of the year, when gym was going to be, changed after the first couple of weeks, depending on teacher schedules or space availability. So that was something I needed to know. If gym was always, in the morning and then moves to the afternoon, I needed to know that so that we could take steps to accommodate that. And then supply teachers as well. That can be a place where things kind of fall through the cracks. One thing that I did was to prepare a letter to a supply teacher saying, with my daughter's picture in the corner, and I said, dear supply teacher, my name is Maren and I have type 1 diabetes, and here's what I need to do every day, da 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 da. And then I asked that be left with the binder, the information that was available to supply teachers, because without that, sometimes the information would not get to the supply teacher and, resulted, for example, in one supply teacher not letting her go to the bathroom when she was high. So just having that information there so that everybody knows what's going on and what to do. So I talked about training and education and really a who needs to know what approach. If you look at diabetes at school, we've arranged the information in different levels. So we have a level, level 1 is awareness, level 2 we call literacy, and level 3 we call expertise. And we can also look at that as sort of that awareness level is going to be all school staff. You want them to have a general idea of what type 1 is, particularly if their only experience or exposure to diabetes is through type 2. You want to make sure that they understand the differences. As I said, you want them to know the symptoms of low blood sugar and the potential consequences of not treating it so that they know how to treat it and what to do in an emergency. Because, at any time your child could be with another member of the school staff who's not the classroom teacher. So those are really important things for them to know about. Those champions or those support staff who are responsible for your student, for helping out your student, need to know a little bit more. They need to understand a little bit about blood sugar, about how it goes high, how it goes low, and the interaction between insulin, food, and physical activity, and then the effect on blood sugar. So this is a little more in-depth information. And then that final level is for staff who have to actually physically help with diabetes tasks. So if you have staff who have to help check blood sugar or help administer insulin, then obviously they're going to need hands-on training with your child's specific equipment and, diabetes technology. Okay, so this is the learning module that I referred to earlier. It's a self-directed course for educators and school staff on diabetes at school. It takes all the information on the site and puts it in a format that they can work through. It's an online module, and then they work through it. They do they read, they watch videos, there's some quizzes and cases. It takes about an hour for them to go through. And I would encourage you to offer this as something that the folks who are really close to your child should really do. Eventually, we would love it if all teachers were required to do this, but for now, of course, it's optional. We launched this a year ago before the 2021-22 school year, and we've had about 300 people across the country do it. So hopefully as time goes on, it'll become more accepted or standard for teachers and school staff to do. So the links are right there below, and from there, when you click on this module, they'll get directed to the learning management platform of the Canadian Pediatric Society. They have to create an account. There's no charge for it, and then they'll go in and they can do the module. So there are a few specific resources that I would encourage you to either include in your training packages, or print out or send links to your schools. These two documents here give a little bit about less about the technical things involved in type 1 and more about the how it affects children and their school experience, and how school staff and teachers can help kids. So it gives a little bit about what it's like to have diabetes and what it means at school. So I would really encourage you to have a look at these. They're available on our site. Print them out and include them in your training packages. And the other resources would be these two printouts on low blood sugar and high blood sugar. The one on low blood sugar actually is two-sided. You don't see the other side here, but on the other side, there's a bit of an algorithm that takes, a bit of a tree that takes people through what to do. And we encourage schools to print these out in color, put them up in their staff room, in the gym, or anywhere that that staff can see them. We do actually here in our offices, we have laminated copies that we give away at conferences and things like that. And I'm happy to send them to you if you would prefer those as well. As I mentioned a few times about how important it is to tailor the training. I just think people will receive training better if they know that you're thinking about their needs and what it is they need to know and how they can apply it in their specific situation. And one example is the phys ed teacher. If a phys ed teacher is different from your child's classroom teacher, we have some information on diabetes at school on physical activity and type 1. And there's a chart on here that I've cut a little bit from that relates to sort of the specific effects the physical activity has on diabetes, and then what school staff can do to mitigate those effects. So this is an example of training that is really specific to the user. And this is not the kind of information that is critical for the bus driver, but it's certainly going to be welcomed by the phys ed teacher. I would encourage you to have a look at the videos on the site. They are all on the Diabetes at School website. They're also over on YouTube, and there's a link to them on, I think, just about every page. And we have 10 or 12 videos on very specific aspects of type 1. So there's one on insulin, there's one on blood sugar, there's one on physical activity, and so on. And these are really good to point out to, you can incorporate them into your training. That's one thing you can do. They're short. They're all about 2 minutes long. You can incorporate them into your training. and you can encourage teachers or school staff to have a look at them if they're, if they need a refresher. They're good throughout the school year. If you encounter a problem and you want to kind of gently, re-educate or retrain, or you think maybe someone has missed a concept somewhere, they're animated, they're kind of cute, and they're upbeat. So it's kind of a gentle way of reinforcing some of the concepts that you want school staff to know about. We talked about a little bit about emergency kits. Depending on the size of your school and how many places your child needs to go to, you want to make sure that there are kits in multiple locations. So, for example, they might have more than one classroom that they're in, so you want to make sure they're in the classrooms that your child is in. It's really helpful to have one in the gym. Yes, you could have one in the office as well. You want to make sure that you have equipment to check blood sugar, even if your child is on CGM. Sensors expire and, we have forgotten, or they fall off. So you want to make sure that there's a blood sugar meter, at least one blood sugar meter in the school with test strips and lancets available. You want to make sure that there's plenty of fast acting sugar to treat lows, some carb snacks for post lows, and of course your name and contact number, and how to, maybe a little note in there that says if supplies are getting low, please contact me, that type of thing. And then there, depending on your needs and your situation, you may have some other things in there as well. We also have a couple of tools on technology on the site. I confess that these may not be 100% up to date because happily things are changing. Yeah, they're up to date as of May 2019, so they're not completely up to date. The good news for us and our kids is that things are changing really quickly, but this can be helpful in your training to actually show people, the technology and the different aspects, even if they're not going to use it, but just, to know, for example, that, okay, if your child's on an Omnipod, they're going to have this device, and then they're going to have this device, on their arm, that type of thing. And then it goes through the various features of each of these. And I promise you we will get these updated as soon as we can. One issue that we come across quite often is we hear from parents who say, oh, the school says that, my child should be doing this, that, or the other thing with regard to their type 1. And this is something that is completely up to you. It's up to you and your family and, perhaps your child's healthcare provider, but it is certainly not up to the school to determine when your child should, check their blood sugar on their own or do an injection or anything like that. And, our kids have to do a lot at an early age. And sometimes, it seems like they're, they can do this and they're mature, but it doesn't mean that they have to. And we put up this chart on the site just to remind people what kids at certain ages can do generally. Every child is different, but generally what kids can do. And then you realize that some of the things that may be asked of kids with type 1 are, not necessarily age appropriate. So if you run into this problem, please, go grab this chart and use it as a teaching tool or something to support you in your, whatever decision that you choose to make about what your child can do. But it is completely up to you. And then again, before I only have a couple of slides left. Just a reminder that having good positive relationships with the school is going to go such a long way, and in thinking about diabetes at school and working with the school as a mutually beneficial thing, that the more they know about diabetes and your child, the more comfortable that they will feel. Reminding them that you're not a health professional either. Well, maybe some folks on this call are health professionals, but most of us are not health professionals. And before our kids were diagnosed, we probably didn't know anything about type 1. I certainly didn't know how to check a blood sugar. I had never, injected anybody with anything. And so, but we learned, and it can be done. So, thinking about them and what they'll need can be really helpful in building that relationship. And the stronger your relationship is with the school, the more they're going to want to support your child and work with you. Okay. And then, but there may be problems. I hope there aren't for you, but there may be problems. So often we have to advocate for our kids. We don't have to do it by ourselves, and there are many parents who have been there before. It's helpful to take a stepwise approach. I think it's tempting, and we're all advocates for our kids, and we love our kids and want the best for them. But kind of taking a stepwise approach can be really helpful. So first and foremost, know what policies are in place and whether your school is following them. That can be a really good place to start. When you're approaching the problem, it really helps, I think, to start with the folks who are directly involved, and maybe you can resolve it. Sometimes it's a misunderstanding, it's a miscommunication, maybe they're not clear on what your child needs, and if it can be resolved, that's great. If it can't, then you go to the next step, which would be the principal usually. And if you can't resolve it with the principal, then you can escalate to the school board. But I guess what I'm trying to encourage is not immediately escalating to the school board and seeing if you can resolve it in your class. It'll be in your school. Sorry, it'll be a lot more pleasant for you in the end. One can also look, I said, there are a lot of parents who have been through things. Is this an issue specific to you and your child, or maybe it's a bigger issue? And if it's a bigger issue, then it really does help to connect with other parents. In Ontario, we have a Facebook group for parents called SOS T1D, and the URL is there. I know there's another one in Alberta. I think there is a Facebook group for parents in Nova Scotia, and then, there may be other ones. And then there's also at least one larger group for parents nationwide where you can connect with other parents. And then, of course, if you're organized and you're still not getting anywhere, Diabetes Canada and JDRF are great sources of information and support, whether it's about the specific issue or in trying to helping you connect with other parents. And then just a reminder, hopefully everything is fine this school year with COVID. This may be the first time, that your child is going back to school because of COVID. You may have been, your child may have been doing online learning since they've been diagnosed, but just a little plug for vaccines, reminding that all kids over 6 months are eligible for COVID-19 vaccines, and they are recommended for all kids, including kids with type 1. So if you haven't yet had a chance to have your child vaccinated, the expert group certainly would encourage that you do. And that's it for me. So I'm really keen to hear what's been going on in the chat with your questions and comments.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. I've been. Are you guys hearing an echo from me?
Just a little bit.
Okay. I've been trying to post all of your links as we've gone, so the chat is mostly full of links, but there were a couple of questions. People were wondering if they could have access to this PowerPoint deck. Is that possible?
Yeah, of course. Sure. I'll send it to you, Ruth, and then if you want to send it out to folks, that'll be fine.
Yeah, I can include it. We'll send an email out tomorrow that's got a link to the presentation, a link to Diabetes at School, and we'll include the PowerPoint as well.
Yeah.
So some of these I think we caught with this. So Anna asked, what happens if you're told by the school that they're unable or not allowed to administer glucagon or any treatments for a low to the child?
So yeah, we used to hear that a lot when glucagon was, an injection with a big, huge needle, and it was very scary. So I would start first with information, right? I would ask why they're not allowed to. and, listen to what they say. And then reinforce that it's a nasal administration. It's, super easy to administer. And I would also reinforce that they can do no harm, right? They can do no harm by administering glucagon. So, there is no reason really not to administer it. But you really kind of have to ask the follow-up question of, well, why? Why can't they? And then, I suspect there would be some misinformation that would follow. And so you would really try to clarify.
I think Nana had a follow-up question. Do you want to unmute yourself to ask that?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for all this information. It's fantastic. Just a quick little background. So my son has been virtual learning for the past 2 years. So he's going back to school for the first time in 2 years this September. He was diagnosed December of 2021. And he's going into grade 8. So such a fun year to go back. But I did have a discussion with the virtual school LST and the LST from the school that he's going to. I'm in Ottawa as well.
Okay.
And basically I was told, because I had the whole discussion about glucagon and all this, the nasal, and they basically said that as a board, it's the OCDSB, the board will not allow them to administer anything to children. And I said, okay, well, what about a little bit of icing sugar in the inside of the lip? Because I was told that would help too. And they said, no, we can't touch the kids. So I said, why don't you if you put the icing on my son's finger, like if he's kind of out of it, and used my son's hand to put the icing in his own mouth. They're like, they can't do that. So I'm like, so my worry, that's my biggest worry, is that, so he's going to school, he's on a pump, he's attended diabetes camp this summer, is a lot more confident in managing his own diabetes, but my fear, and I don't know what to do about it and how to approach it with the school, when I'm being told that they won't touch him. Like if he passes out, all they'll do is call 911. That is all they are allowed to do. So I guess from what you have said, maybe my first step is to look at the board's policy.
Yeah.
To see if that's really true, because I'm like, that's a little bit insane to me. So a kid passes out, is completely unconscious, and all you'll do is call 911 when you know that there is something you can do to help. So
yeah, exactly. And I don't know who it was that gave this information. I'm not 100% familiar with the OCDSB. My daughter was in the Catholic school board,
okay.
and I did send glucagon to school. So the OCDSB policy may not be specific enough.
Okay.
It may be a she said kind of situation, but again, to kind of get at those barriers, to understanding why they can't. Okay. And then, the only other thing that I say is, or that I think, or that I say to myself sometimes, if they're going to dig in their heels like that, is, well, the best we can do is to make sure we prevent that from ever happening.
Right.
So is to make sure that we have the best care plans in place, that that it's something that's not going to happen. At minimum, are they willing to? They're okay with the glucagon being in the school?
They didn't say no, but they won't admit, like, I'm going to send it anyways. Like, I'm not just going to be like, I'm not sending it. So I'm going to send it. It's just, I don't know who will actually administer it. So whether it's getting his friends on board to be able to do it, you know what I mean?
Yes, I know.
Like his closest friends that he's always around.
Yeah.
But I think because the conversation was between the two LSTs from the two schools, so maybe talking actually to the teachers and the principal might also be a next step as well.
Yeah.
Just
I don't want to interrupt, but there's a guest, Britain, whose daughter is also at an OCDSB school, and they don't have that issue. So possibly could the two of you maybe connect? in some ways, because perhaps, Britton, I don't want to put you on the spot with that. I just saw that you responded in the chat to say that you provided all the staff with glucagon training and they're very fully supportive.
Okay.
So it does seem like from the chat that it differs by school even, who's willing to do it, who's not, and it may just be a training issue. So I don't know, Nana, you can see in the chat that Britton has commented.
Yes, I see. Yeah.
See if there's a way that you two can connect, because it might just be that they don't know, like Elizabeth was saying, and if they get the training, it may be a COVID thing, I don't know, but hopefully it's something that we can over. There's another guest as well that's saying that they'll connect. So thank you, everyone. This is wonderful. I can see there's another hand up. Stephanie, did you want to unmute yourself to ask your question?
Hi. Yeah, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
So my son is 4. He was diagnosed when he was 2.5. So he's going into JK. So I've never had any sort of school experience or anything with him. But from what you were saying, they'll give the sugars for, like, they'll give the candy or juice or whatever for the lows, but if they actually are unconscious and they need a glucagon injection or nasal spray, that's when they won't interfere. Like they won't, like, so they'll still give them the candy and stuff to, like, if they're having a low, but if it got really low, then they are refusing to do that.
Well, I think that's what this other parent was saying, but it's not necessarily everyone's experience.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's definitely something to.
I saw it in the medical plan, and I was going to, like, I just got our medical plan today, and I was gonna, like, talk about it with our diabetes education nurse, and just see what that actually meant. But, like, so I guess from my understanding is that they will treat lows, like they'll give the sugar, they'll give the snack, but they won't actually interfere when it's fully serious and, like, the kid is potentially, like, unconscious from the low, right? That seems crazy.
Yeah, it does. It does. And so again, that's, and one can present it as just as a matter of course, that just this is part of the emergency management for my child, and here's what it looks like, and here's a little video which the manufacturer Lilly, they have a little video on it. It's super simple, couldn't be any simpler, and here's what you do in this eventuality. However, we are going to work together that you will never need to do this, because we're going to work together and the care is going to be so great that this will not happen. This doesn't need to happen, right?
No, true, it doesn't
need
especially
to
when
happen.
they have like my son, he has the Dexcom, so things like those, when you have low alerts or low alarms, they shouldn't, should not happen. But okay, all right, okay, that's good to know, and to have something that I can talk about them with, because I was unsure about that.
I see, I think Sarah had her hand up, and then Melanie. So Sarah, did you want to ask your question?
Yes, I was just wondering, my daughter's starting school next year. I'm just trying to prepare and look at what I'm doing. I do have an older daughter who is already in school. I don't know if I missed the information, but what about insulin injections? Because everything that we are doing here is manual. She's on the Dexcom. We're doing the insulin injections with a pen. She doesn't have any other devices. And we're unsure if she will by the time she starts school in September.
Yep. Sorry, you think she will be on a pump by the time she starts school? Or
I don't think she will be.
Oh, you don't think she will be? Okay. So, well, again, are you in Ontario?
I am.
You are, yeah. I mean, this is insulin administration is obviously a huge issue, because we don't, nobody wants children to be on an outdated, or a regimen that just tries to avoid giving an insulin injection in school. So, you have that especially if your child is going to the same school that your eldest is going to, which was the case for me as well when my daughter was entering school. Meet with that principal well in advance, like well in advance, not the week before, but as soon as you can, meet with that principal and say, you know, we're starting JK or SK or whatever it is, and you know, we're going to need insulin injections. We're going to need an, you know, injection before snack and before, and then, you know, it is up to the principal to figure out a way to make this happen. And,
Okay.
you know, some are great and they're going to figure it out. Now they cannot, like, this is my understanding, they cannot force anybody to do this. So, you know, it comes down to a lot of times we as parents are relying on goodwill. We're relying on people in the school to put up their hands and say, I will help. Nobody is forbidden from giving insulin to a child. Okay, that's a myth. That is not true. But they can't be forced to do it. But in my own personal experience and in hearing stories from other parents, there are an awful lot of, you know, amazing people working in schools. And for the most part, people want to help kids. They want to support them in school. So, you know, there are those people out there who will put up their hands and say, sure, I'll do it. And, you know, when my daughter started school, you know, she needed to have her blood sugar checked. There was no CGM or anything like that. And it was the ECEs in kindergarten who took on that role, for example. They didn't have to, but they put up their hands. So, you know, talk to your principal as soon as you can and lay out what your child's needs are and say, you know, let's figure out how we can make this happen. And then the principal should have plenty of time to find somebody. I mean, I've known cases of where, you know, the principal ended up doing this. Now, that's not an ideal situation. I'm not recommending it because you also need backup, right, for the person when the person is not in the building. But, you know, the more time they have to work out who's going to support your child, I just encourage you to go in there with your child's needs first and foremost.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
We have about 4 minutes left, but we have a couple more hands up. Are you okay to stay on like an extra 2 or 3 minutes if we need?
I'm
Elizabeth,
fine.
just to-
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm absolutely fine. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. So I think we had Catherine and no, sorry, Melanie and then Catherine.
Hi, this is Melanie. I'm just kind of here. My son was diagnosed in 2013, so I've kind of been through the trenches, let's say, with the school system. My son goes to the TCDSB, so Toronto Catholic. And I remember kind of walking into the first meeting, and the EA kind of raised her hand and said, like, I'm not comfortable. So, yeah, like I've definitely dealt with situations like that, but I have a few things that I have learned through the years. Number one, obviously, Dexcom, but the top thing that I think is important is kind of like responsiveness. Currently, my son is on Dexcom and the pump, but basically, I'm like in a text chat with 3 people: the principal, his teacher, and the secretary. And basically, basically they know that if I text, like, someone has to answer kind of right away. So responsiveness is super important in terms of that, and just kind of like relationship building, not like networking, but just making sure that you keep like a really good relationship, because yeah, the people at school become your allies, and they've definitely stepped up for us throughout the years. At first, we were on NPH, the same thing. I don't even know how we did it, to be honest with you, but um, and also my son is super active. So one thing that does help is just trying to practice the lunch and breakfast that he would have during school, like practicing them during the summer to see how everything affects, and like lower carb stuff also, you know, has helped. I'm not like some crazy low carb, you know, I'm not like that person. But during school I do keep a lower carb profile just for, you know, that lunch and those snacks. So, and that helps. And that's it.
I think that's really good advice. Really, really good advice.
I think, Catherine, did you want to unmute yourself? Still here? Oh, there we go.
Yep. Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can.
Mhm.
Okay. Yeah, no, I just wanted to respond to the parent that was asking about their child starting junior kindergarten. And not being on a CGM. Like my daughter is, on a pump, sorry. My daughter was diagnosed when she was in senior kindergarten. She's going into grade 5 now, and she still is not on a pump. She's quite resistant to going on, which is quite fine with me, actually. Actually, the injections sometimes are a little bit simpler to manage in some ways. But we've always had a nurse to go to the school at lunches and give insulin. It's always been covered. I'm in Ontario. We've never had to pay for it. It was actually arranged through our diabetes care team, through the hospital when she was diagnosed. But it's just like your local VON or your local nursing care that would go and do home care for people. So that is an option too that definitely should be looked into. And like our school is quite accommodating. They give a space for my daughter to go at lunch with the nurse that's private to get her injections. So I just want everybody to be aware of that.
Yeah, thanks so much for that, Catherine. And I'm sorry for not mentioning anything about nurses. It was not our experience, and I know that, across Ontario it has been, terribly variable whether you could get nursing support in your school. In some jurisdictions you could, no problem, and in some jurisdictions, no. In other provinces, nursing services are much more involved than Ontario. But just one caveat about nursing is that, was it the last school year? I'm sorry, I can't remember. COVID changes time. There was it was during COVID, there was a shortage of nurses, right? Because so many nurses were pulled away to do other things related to COVID. And that shortage of nurses affected school support. And that in turn was used as an excuse not to provide support for kids with type 1. And, one of the things to point out in that situation was, look, you don't need a nurse to deliver insulin, right? Going back to what I said about most of us are not health professionals. You can be trained to do it. So as long as nursing support, if nursing support meets your needs and you can get it, that's great. But you have to be careful that it's not used as an excuse not to provide support. Oh, well, we can't get a nurse, therefore we can't deliver insulin. No. That, anybody can be trained, any competent adult can be trained to deliver insulin. The other piece is that, I should have mentioned too, and your comment, Catherine, made me think of it, is that if a student wants a private space to administer insulin or check blood sugar, or whatever they need to do with their diabetes management, that's great. But children should not be forced to go to another room somewhere else if that's not what they want, right? So it's the level of privacy is something else to mention, because again, that helps to single them out. It takes them out of the classroom. It causes them to miss time either in the class or for lunch. The other thing that worries me about nursing services is what if the nurse is late or there's a snowstorm or something like that? So just want to make sure that again, it's not used as an excuse, or it's not seen as something that needs to be, because there can be potential problems or issues with nursing support. But if it's working for you guys and has worked for you guys, then that is absolutely great. Again, it should be whatever works for any individual child and family.
I think we had Jen and then Alia, and then I think we should close off the chat. I will have all of this sent to you tomorrow, and Elizabeth has very graciously offered to take any questions that people might have afterwards. So there's things you think of or we didn't get to now, but just conscious of everybody's time. So Jen, if you wanted to unmute yourself, and then we'll have one more question after you, and I think we'll let Elizabeth have the rest of her night back.
Hi, thank you so much. I'm just wondering, my daughter has just moved from a very small private school into a very big public middle school. Last year, we texted back and forth a lot through Messenger about treatment decisions, and I would frantically call her if she was going low very quickly. That was the fastest way to get her help. What advice do you have around the transition into middle school around texting diabetes in that situation? Because I know it's just not only that it's distracting, but at the same time, it's very important.
Yeah, oh gosh, that's actually my own experience. My daughter she's starting grade 9 in a couple of weeks, so we just went through middle school, and I wish I had good advice for you. It sounds like you've done some creative things, but it is challenging. It really is, because yeah, my daughter went from a small, K to 6 to, an intermediate 7 to 8. And you're dealing with, your kid being more independent and not wanting to stand out. And so I was doing all the texting back and forth, which in hindsight, so I can't offer any advice based on what I did, because I don't think I did necessarily the best thing. But maybe I let go a little too quickly, and maybe should have had a little more involvement from the teachers. Because yes, they're independent, but there still should be that communication with the teachers, and so that everybody's on board. I will say that in grade 7, she had an amazing gym teacher who was on board and who would ask her. I think she had a Libre at the time, ask her what her blood sugar was before gym and so on. So having that one person who knew a little bit more than some of the other teachers and who was a champion was really helpful. And I think in hindsight, I myself let go of that too quickly, assuming that, well, she's in middle school, she's more independent. So, as we say, even kids who are older and who are self-managing still need help when they're low. And it's great that, a friend is willing to help, but I think we have the right to have a competent adult in the school, aware and ready to help.
And there is just one more question from, I apologize if I mispronounced your name, it's Aluia. You wanted to unmute yourself?
Yeah, it's Aloia. So my daughter, she was just diagnosed at the end of this school year, which was her first year of high school. And now that she's going into grade 10 this school year, I'm kind of concerned, because she's kind of quiet and she struggles to talk to people. And she was really embarrassed about having diabetes. She would try to hide it from people, and she would be like, oh, I don't want anybody to see, I'm embarrassed about it. And I'm scared that if something happens, she will not ask for help. She will not ask for assistance, and that she'll just keep quiet about it. Because even at home, she's quite upset all the time about it. And she's like, oh, I'm gonna turn 15 soon. I'm kind of embarrassed about this. I don't want people to know. And she's even struggles to ask questions at school. We had an issue with that last year with her asking questions. And I'm really concerned that she's not going to get the proper help when she needs it. So I wanted to know if you had any advice on that.
I'm sorry to hear that. That's really tough. It's hard enough being 15, but being 15 with something like diabetes, it's so hard. It's so hard. And I can totally understand you worried about, her not, not being forthcoming about her needs. That's a huge worry. Have you had a chance to speak with the school? I know in high school it's tricky because they have so many different teachers, but have you had the chance to speak with someone at the school?
No, not yet. We had a small conversation last year, but they couldn't really do much because it was the very end of the school year, and she was all brand new to it, so they couldn't do too much.
Yeah. Well, I guess what I would encourage, and there may be others on the call who have better advice and more experience, but I would encourage the more that you can communicate with and educate the teachers and the other adults who are going to be with her on a day-to-day basis. So even if you can grab the emails of all her different classroom teachers with her knowledge, of course, right? Like making her feel comfortable about this and just that it's just for her own, obviously it sounds like standing out would be an issue, understandably. So working with that, but even an email to all of her different classroom teachers and the principal to say, here's, my daughter has type 1 and she hasn't been living with it for very long. And, here's what it means for the school day. And, at minimum, letting them know that, what a low blood sugar might look like, that, it might look like whatever it looks like for your daughter, like, and here's what you might do about it, or things like that. Just trying to create those eyes and ears of those competent adults who are in that space with her on a regular basis. That's the first thing that comes to mind, but it's tricky. Does anyone else have some good advice? Because this is important.
I saw that Joaquin had his hand up, so maybe he had advice that he was looking to offer. I've also just put in the chat the JDRF Facebook support group.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, so it's my name's Sephora. Yeah, it was just my 2 cents on what the last participant was speaking around her teenage daughter. My son is only 4 and he was diagnosed when he was 2. But I'm also T1D in my 40s, but I was diagnosed at 14. And it was a week before high school started. And there was no care plan or any training at all. So I was flying literally solo the entire 5 years. And I was very much like the teenager mentioned, very embarrassed, very shy, didn't want anyone to know. I think I managed for the 4 years to keep it a secret. So I could really relate when you mentioned that. And, everyone's experience is their own, but the one thing that popped out in my mind, which if I could go back, perhaps I could do, isn't really a solution for the school, but just to find a peer that has diabetes, which isn't easy to do because we don't go around with a headband on saying T1D. But, there are groups, diabetes camp or I Challenge Diabetes leadership camps, to find someone to relate to, because I found much later on in life that's really empowering to not be the only one. And so, of course, that's not something the school's going to do, but just as kind of something to maybe keep in the back of your head that can help with the, I don't know, acceptance, if you will. I'm 42. I don't know if I've accepted it, but whatever it is, I don't know. That was just my 2 cents that kind of came up when you were mentioning your daughter. That sounded a lot like me.
Yeah, thank you for your advice. I think because she already kind of stands out a little bit just on her own without the diabetes, that she's just worried that she will stand out more and make it worse. But thank you for that. I would definitely look into that.
Yeah, good luck.
Thank you so much. I know we went a little bit long, but I appreciate everyone who stayed on and everyone contributing in the chat. And I think this is, for a lot of people who had a diagnosis over COVID, this might be their first year back, and it's, I'm sure, incredibly nerve-wracking. I hope that this was helpful to everybody. I know I put a lot of resources in the chat. The link to the site itself will be in the email tomorrow, as well as presentation. Will also include the slide deck as well. I've put our JDRF support group in the chat as well, the link to how to become a youth ambassador, so that does connect kids and teens with T1D across Canada. And I know a lot of the kids have found it extremely empowering to take control of that and to also advocate within their province. And Jen, I think you saw I put some information in about how to advocate in your province in New Brunswick. That is something JDRF is focused on Atlantic Canada this year. They are shamefully behind in a lot of ways of coverage, and we are working on that. So I want to make you aware that that's definitely on our radar as well at JDRF. So thank you so much, Elizabeth. Thank you for the incredible presentation, for your time. Thank you to everybody who participated. And I hope everyone has a really good school year.
Thanks so much, Ruth. Thanks everyone for joining and for all your good advice. Thank you.